get started. Okay, I just had a question asking me how points work for the online league. So basically, I think I said it somewhere. It's very similar to how money works. So if you just try to maximize the amount of money you win, you'll usually end up getting also maximizing your number of points. It's slightly different in that the top 33% get points, as opposed to only the top 20% getting money. But the sum of the points given out is always equal to the number of players playing the tournament. So if like 50 people play a tournament, then like the top 33% will get points. So it's like 17 people will get points, and first place will get maybe like 7 points or something like that, and second place will get like 5 points, and like 4, and like 3.5, something like that. I'll send an email about it later. Yeah. Okay, so I had this up for the people who came in early. So just a quick question. Here, under the gun +1 goes all in for about 6.5, about 7, a bit over 7 big blinds. And I'm asking whether you should call here. So I'm just going to give my answers quickly without giving too much explanation. This was sort of just a brain teaser at the start. So I would call pocket fours. I think pocket fours is definitely good enough to call. I would call with ace-9 suited as well. So I gave a bunch of alternatives up here. So I would call with pocket fours. I would call with ace-9 suited. I would call with king-queen offsuit. So I would call with the first 3 hands. And I would not call. I would fold with the last 3 hands. Ace-2 offsuit. So even though ace-2 offsuit is better than king-queen offsuit, I would call king-queen offsuit but fold ace-2 offsuit. Because it's too likely that he has something like ace-9 that is just crushing it if you have ace-2 offsuit. I would also fold king-7 offsuit. I would also fold 10-9 suited. Okay, so anyways, okay, so let's get started. So I've been watching, yeah, sorry.
Just a quick question. You use that differently in a cash game than a tournament?
Not really. It would essentially be the same, but these situations very rarely come up in a cash game. Because in a cash game, people usually have at least 50 big blinds in front of them. So in this situation where someone only has 7.5 big blinds, it basically never comes up in a cash game. Yeah. Okay, so I've been watching a bit of people playing online. It looks like there's been some days of really exciting competition. And I'm going to first go through some stuff that I think the most common mistakes that people are making. So remember this rule of thumb. I did this first lecture. I said if you have less than 15 big blinds, then you should just go all in or fold. So what's wrong with this picture? So what's wrong with this? Yeah, anyway.
Didn't raise?
Right, exactly. It's what I just said, right? You have under the gun +1, they have less than 50, they have 10 big blinds, right? They have around 10 big blinds. They had 7,900 to start the hand. Around 10 big blinds. And I said if you have 10 big blinds, either go all in or fold. Don't do anything else. And I'm seeing lots of people do this. So this is bad. And I'll explain, I talked about this first class as well, but I'll explain more in depth why this is bad. But never do this. And I'm seeing a lot of people do this. When you have less than 15 big blinds, either fold or go all in. So a lot of people are doing this, which is bad. A lot of people are doing this, which is also bad. If you're going to raise it all, just raise all in. Don't only raise 2 big blinds. So I want to see more of this. I want to see more of this going all in. Or, if you don't have a good hand, just fold. So I want to see more of the last 2 and less of the first 2. So I'm just reiterating this again because this is by far the biggest mistake I'm seeing people make. And I'm going to explain more why this is so disastrous. So just again, if you have less than 15 big blinds, what are the 2 options? One is go all in, or 2 is fold. Okay, good. Okay, so this is by far the biggest mistake I've seen yet. Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit more about why is this so bad. So like I said, this is very bad. But this is okay. So this is okay because in this case, it's the exact same hand, except for I've given everyone more chips. So in the previous case, everyone had around 10 big blinds, right? 8,000, you have about 8,000 and the big blind is 800, so you have 10 big blinds. In this case, I've given everyone around 20 big blinds, a bit less than 20 big blinds, but more than 15. So in the first case, I said go all in or fold, don't just raise. But in this case, I'm saying just raising is all right. So let's talk about why it's really bad in the first case, but all right in this case. So in the first case, suppose you do raise to 1600 with ace-10 suited, which is one of the weakest hands you would raise from this position. And this happens, where the player behind you goes all in. Okay? So let's do a bit of analysis of this hand. So you need to call 8 big blinds to win a total of 22 and a half big blinds. So I'm going to walk through the calculations slowly. So let's analyze what we have to do if we call. We need to call approximately 8 big blinds, right? 6,300, that's approximately 6,400, which is 8 times 800. So we need to call approximately 8 big blinds. And how much are we winning in total if we call and win? So we basically count how much is already in the pot, right? That's the definition of pot odds, of something to something odds. So we need to put in 8 big blinds. And how much is in the pot already? There's 10 here, right? 7,900, approximately 8,000. There's 10 here. There's about 1 here, about 1 here, 2 here, and half here. So there's 14 and a half. Is this clear to everyone? There's 14 and a half already in the pot. Everyone understands the calculation, right? It's a very simple calculation. You're just adding all the chips already in the pot, right? 14 and a half, right? So we need to put in 8 big blinds to win a total pot of 22.5 big blinds, right? 8 plus 14 and a half is 22 and a half. And where does this 36% number come from? Is 8 divided by 22 and a half. Okay, so I'm not losing anyone here, right? This is just basic, like, expectation math. Everyone understands what's going on, right? It's just addition and division, right? Everyone knows how to calculate this 36%. If you don't know, please ask, because if you don't understand this, then the rest of the lecture won't really make sense. So if you don't know, it's okay if you don't. It's okay if you don't know. I will explain. Okay, good. Okay. So the point is, if you only need 36% equity to call, right? That's what we calculated. We only need 36% equity to call. We're definitely going to call with ace-10 of clubs. So if you use poker still, you'll see that your equity against a range of, let's just put them on this range. It's approximately right. Pocket sixes are better. Ace jack are better. King queen are better. As you can see, all of these hands are dominating you, but still, you still have 39% equity against this range. So you're going to call. So the point is, remember the sweet spot theory, right? We were talking about why to raise big versus why to raise small. The reason for raising small is to escape when you have a bad hand. Like in this case, when you only have ace-10, you want to be able to escape. And the reason for raising big is to disallow the blinds, to have good odds to call and defend against you stealing your blinds. But the point is, we just proved that we can't escape anyway when we only have 10 big blinds. If you only have 10 big blinds, you cannot escape anyway by the calculation we just did. So the point is, all the advantages of raising small, which was to escape, don't apply, because you can't escape anyway. So there is no advantage to raising small. So there's absolutely zero advantage to raising small. So you might as well raise as big as possible, which means go all in. So that's why it's just an illogical play to not go all in, because there's no advantages to it, and there's only disadvantages where you allow people to see the flop for cheap. Okay, so this is why I want to see, so let's just go through the pictures again. So too much of this, right? Too much of this when you have 10 big blinds, just calling. When you have 10 big blinds, raising to 2 big blinds. Too much of this is all bad, and I've seen too much of this. And there needs to be more just going all in, risking all your money, or just getting out of the hand. not wasting any money on the hand. Okay, so that's enough of that, but I really wanted to drive the point home. Okay, now let's look at the second case and see why we can escape. So it's the same situation with ace-10 of clubs, except now you have 20 big blinds. So if you do the same calculation, you need to call 17 big blinds to win a total pot of 40 and a half big blinds. So if you do the division, 17 divided by 40.5, you'll see that you need 42% equity, which you definitely do not have, so you can escape it fully.
Well,
yeah.
So by escape, you need your hand is, you can't escape because your hand is so good that you should be playing it, right?
Right, because you've already put in such a large percent of all your chips that you cannot escape. There is no escape. But in the second case, so in the first case, you put in 2 big blinds and you only had 10 big blinds. That's 20% of all your chips. You can't really escape because it's too large a percent of your chips. But in the second case, if you do the math, you'll see that you can escape because you had 19 big blinds and you only put in 2. And the percentage of your chips that you put in is a lot smaller. So it makes sense for you to escape. Yeah.
Is it another possibility that in the tournament, top 20 people actually get in the money, and now you are 21, so you go on to the question right before that. You don't go on. Is that just?
Yes. Okay. So yeah, this is a good point, and I haven't really talked about it because it makes calculations a lot more complicated. But I'll talk about it in a few classes probably. But yeah. So the question is, what he said was, if like the top 20 get paid and there's 21 left, you want to be more conservative and you don't want to go all in as frequently. But that means you just fold. You still shouldn't be raising or calling. You should just fold in that case if you're trying to be conservative.
Yeah. So how do you assign a distribution to what your opponent has when he goes all in?
Okay, so this is basically mostly just experience. And also, remember in the first class, I showed you how to calculate which hands he should re-raise with. So it's a combination of experience and doing lots of calculations with poker stove and seeing how much equity certain hands have against certain ranges. So, sorry, one sec. So yeah, so when I say a range, I mean, yeah, it looks like I'm kind of pulling it out of the blue, but I think all the ranges that I give should be approximately correct based on experience. And you can also figure the same things out by doing the calculations with poker stove that I showed you how to do last class. Okay. Sorry, question?
Yeah, do you think the ranges is kind of in detail when you do this live outcome or so?
Sorry, can you say that?
When you do this live outcome or so, do you think you hands the ranges in some way?
Yes, yeah, you do. So after you've done it a while, you'll remember, you'll be like, oh, I was in the same situation a week ago, and you'll remember. So the point is, once you do enough calculations and see enough hands, you'll sort of remember approximately what their range is, because you've seen every possibility, basically. Yeah. Okay, yeah?
I guess back to that question, first, is there like a Nash equilibrium? Because like, let's say you're the guy who's raising, right? You might not have the range that the second guy thinks you have when you raise any ranges you think he has that, so you can force him to. Well, is there like a Nash equilibrium?
Yes. So I mean, yeah. So like the ranges that I'm suggesting are not necessarily the Nash equilibrium ranges, but they're more the ranges that you see the most often in practice, I'd say, which is pretty close to Nash equilibrium, but it's not necessarily mathematically the optimal range for the. Yeah.
So what if we have pocket kings at the same position, instead of two decisions, just link in and raise all in or call all in after the other guy is all in after that?
Yeah. So if sorry. So if you're saying if this guy has pocket kings.
No. I mean, now we have ace-10 suited. Mm-hmm. Instead of this, we have pocket kings.
Yeah. Yeah. So
in that case, we want to go all in.
Right. So
like just get the stable lines.
Right. You would still go all in because like it doesn't really make sense for you to not go all in if you have less than 15 big blinds. Yeah. And yes, I mean that's a very good hand rate, so you would call in this case. But okay, so Right, so, okay, so this is the general pre-flop escaping rule. I mean, the calculation is different every time, but in general, if you put in 1/5 or more of your stack in pre-flop, then you should never fold the hand pre-flop. So you put in too big a portion of your stack. So that's what I was talking about when we were doing the calculations. If you only have 10 big blinds and you raise the 2 big blinds, basically you should never fold the hand pre-flop because you'll always have a chance of winning that. And you put in too large a percent of your stack. So otherwise, you can think about folding. As you can see in the second case when we had ace 10, it was way too much. It was like 19 big blinds and we folded. So yeah, I mean, if you have 12 big blinds, technically you could raise to 2 big blinds and escape. But I'm just going to say it's still better in general to go all in instead. Later in the class, I'm going to talk about situations where you don't go all in when you have less than 15 big blinds. But for now, it's just a catch-all rule that is in general less prone to making mistakes. So I just recommend you just follow the rule because if you don't, you could put yourself in very bad situations. Okay. Right, so the same situation again. In this case, I had 10 big blinds. I already put in 2 big blinds, so I call. I'm just going through the same situation over and over again to really drill this home. Right, so in the second situation, I fold, in the second situation, I still call, sorry. So the point of this was, as you can see here, I actually have a lot more chips now. I have 40,000 chips. So this is definitely not 20% of my chips. But I still call because it's 20% or more of my opponent's chips, right? This was the point of effective stack size I was talking about last class. The most we can play for this hand is 8,000. So essentially we put in 20% of our chips, even though we have more chips behind. So yeah, so this is a clarification sort of from last class. So your effective stack size is almost always the same as your stack size. It only isn't when you are the big stack at the table by a lot. So I might have confused a lot of people with this term, but really when I say effective stack size, I mean the same thing as stack size. The only difference is this situation I just described. When you're a big stack and everyone else only has 8,000 chips, right? You have 40,000 chips, but everyone else at the table only has 8,000 chips. When you're the big stack, your effective stack size in this case is only 10 big blinds because that's how much everyone else has. So this is the only situation when your effective stack size is different than your real stack size. And yeah, only when you're the big stack by a lot. Yeah?
What if everybody has 40,000, but only that guy who's only actually has 8,000? What about that?
Then in this situation, your effective stack size is still 10 big blinds. Because it depends on your opponent, and your opponent in this hand only has 10 big blinds. So like essentially the effective stack size is the maximum amount that you can play for that hand. And in this case, it's only 10 because everyone else is folded. So yeah, so you only have to worry about players who haven't folded. Okay, so this is the same situation again, where you have 40,000 and he has 40,000. So in this situation, you can fold because everyone has a lot of chips and you haven't put in anywhere near 20% of your chips or whatever, so you can fold. Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit about sizing when re-raising someone pre-flop because I think this was another thing I saw that I think people have been essentially getting wrong a lot. So I'm going to talk a bit about sizing when you're re-raising pre-flop. So, okay, let's suppose we have this situation. So everyone has 40,000 chips, okay? Everyone has 40,000 chips, which is around 50 big blinds. And under the gun +1 raises to 2,000, and you pick up a good hand here. You pick up a good hand in this position, and you want to re-raise. So let's suppose we just re-raise really small, do 3,200. Let's see what's going on. So what is his situation? He needs to call 1.5 big blinds, right? He needs to call 1,200, which is 1.5 big blinds. And how much is already in the pot? Well, you put in 4, and then there's 2.5 from the blinds and the antes. So that's 6.5 plus 2.5 that he already put in. So it's 9. So if you only re-raise to 3,200, you're giving your opponent 6-1 odds because he only has to call 1.5 to win 9, which is pretty ludicrous because if you only have ace-king, no matter what 2 cards he has, he's going to be profitable if he's allowed to call with 6-1 odds. So, even if he has ace-queen, the chances that a queen comes on the flop is more than 1 in 7 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is way too small. And I've seen too many people re-raise to just this size, which is way too small. So, this is about a good size in this situation, raising to 5,000. So, in this case, if you do the same math, you're only giving him 3-1 odds, which is a lot less ludicrous. So, the theory behind it is the exact same as before. It's the same sweet spot theory that as raising pre-flop, the same thing applies to re-raising pre-flop. So if you re-raise, it's the same theory in the sense that if you re-raise too small, you're giving him really good odds. And if you re-raise too big, you're risking a lot of chips. So that's why you don't want to re-raise too big or too small. So empirically, you would raise to about 2.5 times the size of the first raise. This is a good number. So as you can see here, he raises to 2,000, I raise to 5,000, which is 2.5 times his raise. So this is so if you compare the general rule for re-raising pre-flop to the general rule for raising pre-flop, they have a lot of the same characteristics. So when you raise pre-flop, you can change a bit. You raise it 3 times on average, and then here you raise it 2.5 times the size of the first raise, right? So the general rule of thumb is raise to 2.5 times the size of the first raise instead of raising to 3 times the size of the big blind. And you have the same theory applies. If you have fewer big blinds, then you can take down your re-raising size. So. And don't forget the escaping rule when you're re-raising. So this is bad. Because here, even though your re-raising size is correct, you've put in more than 20% of all your chips, right? So I've changed this situation where everyone only has 20,000 chips instead of 40,000 chips. In this case, you've already put in 5,000 and you only have 15,000 behind. So you've already put in a quarter of your chips. So what does that mean? You should just go all in instead. Because you're never escaping anyway. So you might as well give him as bad odds as possible. There's no advantages of re-raising small. So don't do this if you, so while you're keeping into account the re-raise size, you should also remember the escaping rule. So in this case, if you're already going to put in more than 20% of your chips, you should just go all in instead. And that's what I'm doing.
Will?
Yeah.
When do you call?
Sorry. Okay. You mean just calling the situation? Yeah. I'll talk about it later. So yeah, sometimes you want to just call. Sometimes you want to just call. I'm going to get to that actually very soon. Okay. Cool. Okay. So we're going to get to that now. Okay. So I'm done with talking about pre-flop raising and re-raising, and I'm going to talk about pre-flop calling basically. So this was the beginner mistake number 1 that I still see some people make is, if the pot hasn't been raised yet, you only have 2 options, raise or fold, no calling. The exception is when you're in the small blind situation. So I still see a lot of people doing this, which from what I said in the first lecture is not good. In this situation, you should just raise. If the pot has not been raised yet, and you have a decent hand, you shouldn't just call. You should just raise to give yourself a chance of stealing the blinds for free, right? So this is bad, and I still see a lot of people doing this. This was the exception I was talking about. This is okay, where you call from the small blind, even though the pot hasn't been raised. So this is all right, but don't worry too much about the exception. Okay. So once again, this is bad, because the pot hasn't been raised yet, and you just call. So once again, it's the same thing. Don't do this. Don't do this. If the pot hasn't been raised yet and you like your hand, you should just raise to give yourself a chance of winning all the money pre-flop. Okay, so now's the question about calling a raise. So in this situation, calling here I think is fine. Calling here is totally reasonable. Because the pot has already been raised. HJ minus 1 or hijack minus 1 has already raised the pot, in which case you can just call. So why is this? Okay, so recall that I said that you should never just call pre-flop if the pot hasn't been raised yet. But if the pot has been raised, then calling is okay. So why is this? The reason is the big blind can put in another raise pre-flop when he has a good hand, even if you limp. So call. Sorry, I should have just said call. Even if you just call. So what does that mean? So let's look at this hand where you have 9-8 suited here on the button and you just call. The big blind, if he has a good hand, he can raise it up anyway. So, so if you were calling with the hopes of not having to put in too much money pre-flop, it doesn't really work because the big blind people behind can always raise anyway. But the thing is, when you call a pre-flop raiser, he does not get to raise again, right? So in this situation where you had 9-8 of hearts, and you just called, HJ minus 1, who was the pre-flop raiser, does not get another opportunity to raise again after he's seen that you call, right? So this is why calling is all right, because so if you call in this situation, you get to see the flop. But if you raise, let's suppose I raise to 600 instead, then HJ minus 1 gets to re-raise again if he wants, right? So this is why sometimes you want to call, because if you call, the initial raiser does not get to raise again when he has a really good hand. So see, by raising here, you put yourself in a disastrous situation. I'm not saying raising is terribly bad, but you can put yourself in a really bad situation by raising. So raising has some disadvantages in this case because you give them the chance. You give the original raiser, HJ minus 1, the chance to raise again. But in this case, raising has no advantages. Calling has no advantages. Because even if you call, the players behind can still raise again pre-flop. So if the pot has not been raised yet, calling has 0 disadvantages. But if the pot has already been raised, then calling has some advantages. So that's why calling is all right when the pot has already been raised, but bad if it hasn't. Yeah.
If you call, or if somebody's already raised and you call, can't somebody behind you still raise again? So then the other person can just raise again.
Right. Exactly. So in this situation, the small blind and the big blind can still raise. But if they don't, then none of these guys get a chance to raise again. But if you raised instead of called, then you grant them the opportunity to raise again.
Right, but isn't this situation like similar to the situation where you call if nobody has raised? So if nobody has raised and you call, and the people behind you can raise, whereas if somebody has raised and you call, the people behind you can still raise.
Right.
I feel like the disadvantages that you're talking about are somewhat similar.
Right. Okay. But in this situation, there's no one ahead of you who you're granting the extra opportunity to raise. Right? Here you're giving these people an extra opportunity to raise, but here you are. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Right. Okay. So hopefully that I drove that point across. So if the blind has not been raised, you should raise yourself. If the blinds have been raised, then just calling is all right. So now let's talk about how to deal with callers. So even though I've explained why you should never be just calling when the pot hasn't been raised, I'm sure some people are still going to do this. So usually when someone calls when the pot hasn't been raised, the term we use is limpers. So it's usually a derogatory term because it's usually a bad play to just call. So that's why we use this sort of a derogatory term for such people. I hope no one is offended, but this is just the standard word that everyone uses. Okay, so one thing to note about dealing with people who call is, let's suppose we have this situation where 3 people in front of you just limped or called, and I'm telling you, you want to raise, right? So now the thing you've got to realize is you need to change your raise size a bit. So if you were following my rules from last lecture, in this situation you would raise to 3 times the big blind, or raise to 150. But the problem is this is too small now, because there's more money in the pot, right? Let's suppose you raise to only 150. When it's folded to CO, he only has to call 100, and there's already 200, 300, 375 in the pot. It's really good odds for him. So you want to make the odds worse by raising more when there's already money. So a general rule you can use is you raise 3 big blinds plus 1 big blind for each limber. So if there are limbers ahead of you, when you should raise a bit bigger, because there's already some money in the pot, so you can raise bigger. So a decent rule is just add 1 big blind for each limber behind. So in this case, you would normally raise to 3, but there's 3 limbers. So you would raise to 3 plus 3, which is 6 big blinds, which is $300. So in this case, I would raise to $300. Okay, I'm going to skip a few slides.
Can you explain that again?
Yeah, sure. So this slide again?
Yeah, I mean, why does the one big blind add up?
Sorry, say that again?
Why do we add one big blind per limber?
Okay, so we got to raise bigger when there's limbers. And the reason is because when there are limbers, there's more money in the pot already. So if you only raise to 150, then CO is going to have ludicrous odds to call. All of these people are going to have ludicrous odds to call. Because when they call, they also take into account the $50 that they each already put in. Right? So you should just think about this as raising where there's more blinds already in the pot. Normally when you raise, if there's no limbers, there's only the $25 small blind plus the $50 big blind, right? But in this case, the way to sort of think about it is there's those blinds plus these blinds. So the blinds are bigger, so you raise bigger. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to skip a few slides about playing pieces. Okay. So I'm going to talk about some post-flop play now. So I've been talking mostly about pre-flop play. I'm going to give people a lot of examples of hands of post-flop play because I think this is also important. I haven't really done this yet. But I'm going to take a break. I'm going to take a 3-minute break and start in like 3 minutes. And yeah, you can go into that.